Hi, it's me, Ingrid FP, and welcome to a CBT therapy episode 6. And it's going to be about chapter 5 in this book about social anxiety. It's in Swedish, so I'm translating on the fly. I want to remind everybody that I'm not a mental health professional. I do happen to be a medical resident, but I am not in the field of psychiatry, so I'm not a psychologist. And I basically don't know much about therapy, except that from this book, in the context of my own therapy. So I've tried to make this episode before, but then I realized that a lot of this book is just repeating stuff that has been in earlier chapters. So I came to a half hour, and then I didn't make it further. So this chapter is about exposure, how to get closer to what is difficult. And so we need to test these things in reality. And I'm going to summarize how it goes. The thing is, we have to stay in situations that make us anxious repeatedly over time so that it becomes less of an anxiety-inducing experience, and so that we can actually do the stuff that we want to do. So they give an example of like a 2-year-old who wants to go into the water, and then she goes into the water and she starts crying because it's scary, and then the father can choose to do 2 things. Either he can comfort her and bring her home, or he can comfort her and tell her to take another step into the water, and stay into the water together for a while. And then next time it will be less hard. So that's how we went to parent ourselves, okay? And it gives us 4 different steps of how to, like, what exposure is. First, we have to analyze. We have to plan. What is it that makes us anxious? What is it that we avoid? And what sort of thoughts we have? And the specifics, like what kind of people is it that I'm scared of, and what how big the group is, and what situations it is. Then step 2 is to make a hierarchy of our anxiety so that we can prepare for the situations. So for example, least scary is to talk to a group of 3 people, and most scary is to talk to a group of 100 people. Step 3, to actually do the exposure, planned, structured, and repeatedly. Because if we don't do it repeatedly, it's not going to be as good. We have to be aware that the anxiety will get bigger if we do the exposure in a wrong way. And step 4 is the keeping it up. So you have to repeatedly do this, and in a short amount of time. So you can't just repeat it once a week or once every month. It's best to do things once a day, and if you can't do it once a day, at least to do longer exposures, like something that takes 20 minutes instead of something that takes 1 minute. Okay. So then they talk about, like, you have to do this physically. It's better to do it physically than just in theory and the books and then online, because it has to give us anxiety, okay? And a lot of us have agoraphobia as well, so better to do it face-to-face live. Distraction. You can't be in the situation fully present if you are trying to distract yourself while you're seeing the thing that is scaring you. So if you have a phobia of spiders, you shouldn't be like sitting there with the spider and thinking about the beach, okay? Because then you're not actually looking at the spider. At the same time, you have to do this progressively and not flood yourself with like the most terrible experience ever. So don't start by doing a presentation in front of 100 people. If you have trouble even having a presentation with 3 people, Don't throw yourself in a room full of spiders if you fear spiders. Like start small and work your way progressively up. And you should do this regularly, hopefully every day, but I don't know how that will work out. They want you to work at least an hour a day on these things, so yeah, it's difficult. Why hasn't this worked before? Well, our earlier exposures, before we came into contact with CBT and stuff, is often that we put ourselves in a surprise, like in an unsuspected, uncontrollable situation where we didn't want to be in that situation in the first place, but then we end up being in it. The exposure is usually a short period of time, because we run away from it. The exposure is seldom because we avoid a lot of things. And the exposure often gives us automatic negative thoughts. And we have coping mechanisms. Well, exposure, if we do it in the correct way, according to this book, is more controlled, predictable. You sit in a situation for a longer period of time to realize that the anxiety levels eventually do go down. The exposure is often regular, and so it like you get a sense of pride afterwards, and then can repeat it, and then it gets easier and easier. Then we now can challenge the negative automatic thoughts, and we try to avoid instead the coping mechanisms rather than avoiding the situation. So what do you do when you do an exposure? First, you have to prepare yourself, okay? Because now we know about what things give us anxiety, what things give us avoidance. We have to have control over the situation. We have to know that something terrible, like we know approximately what is going to happen in these situations logically. We can't go to a party where we don't know anybody and where we have no idea of any of the circumstances, like the place or the time. It needs to be slightly controlled. Also, we need to figure out certain exposures that might take a longer time rather than short ones. So for example, the guy who stands in front of the store and asks where the store is, that I had an example of last video, he should ask several people, not just one person, where the store is, because the exposure is only a minute, basically. So you need to repeat it several times. And once your anxiety starts to go down, then you can stop having it so often. But at first you need to do it really often. And then you should do it diversify in several situations. So at work, but maybe also talking to at dinner or with other people, so that you can start feeling like your generalized anxiety is, you've covered all the bases. And don't find something that is completely impossible, but you need to have a challenge. So it needs to make you feel something like anxiety or make you think of negative thoughts, but you can't go into an impossible situation. Like if you're scared of spiders, don't go into the room full of spiders, because you might very well get a panic attack. And then you'll have to run away, and that's like the opposite of what we want. We want to be able to stay in the situation for a longer period of time. We also don't want exposure that has huge risks. For example, don't run around naked at your sister's wedding. That's the example that I give you here. So do things that are a little bit less dramatic, like saying to the cashier that you forgot your wallet. That kind of thing might give anxiety to people. So I don't know how that would work out. You would go to the store specifically in mind with the fact that you don't have your wallet. I think that would be it would be a weird situation. Then you need to have a way to measure your progress so that you can feel proud of yourself, and that creates your goals for these exposures. So for example, the goal is to stay in the situation. So even if you get red in the face during the presentation, the most important is that you stayed in the situation. Okay, it doesn't matter if you got red in the face. We need to have realistic expectations. Okay, we will get more anxious for a while probably, and not like our anxiety won't disappear overnight. Okay, it will take some time and effort. Don't work against the anxiety. Okay, let it flow, because if you're against it, it's like falling asleep. If you're just like angry at yourself not falling asleep, then you won't fall asleep. Same thing with anxiety. Then it talks about shifting focus, but I don't really understand this, because they say that, well, to not be as self-conscious, you should shift your attention to the environment around you, because that makes you anxious. But it's like, isn't that a little bit of a distraction? I have a hard time reconciling the distraction with the shifting focus. But I think that is coming in the next chapter. So let's see. Then it talks about how to avoid your avoidance. Okay, to stop avoiding things. First, there are three different kinds of avoidance that they talk about. First, avoiding social situations, like leaving a party early. And so it's better if we stay in the situation, because anxiety will go down. Okay. So that is one of them. So to stay in the situation, in the social situation, even though you want to leave, or not going to the situation at all. Another one is avoiding behaviors that might give bodily symptoms. So you think that, okay, I'm going to sweat a lot during this presentation. So you try to hide these symptoms. It's a kind of coping strategy. So you might put on baggy clothes that don't show sweat as much, or like black clothes. So we need to understand that we will have these reactions, and we shouldn't like hide these reactions if we want to feel more relaxed in these situations, okay, in the long run. And the number 3 is the most difficult one, because it's the most subtle behavioral, like things that aren't really avoidance. It's just avoiding strategies. Okay, so this is the important ones. It's distraction, which we've already talked about. So, like, for example, you go to the party, but you say, oh, I'll take the dishes. And so you'll be taking care of the dishes rather than actually socializing with the people at the party. Or you are in a waiting room and you start reading a book, or so you have a book with you, or you're scrolling through your mobile when you're in the waiting room instead of just sitting there. Which, yeah, a lot of people do these days, but in the context of exposure, you need to actually be in the moments that are fear-laden situations. And then you have coping strategies. So, for example, avoiding eye contact, not talking about yourself, putting on a bunch of makeup so that you don't become red in the face, or that you hide your face by, like, you know, putting your hand in front of your mouth, talking a lot, trying to find out who is at the party before you go to the party, which is something that I do quite a lot, unfortunately. That you sit down, or that you like hide yourself a little bit when you go into the situations. You sit in the back. There are all sorts of coping strategies. But so that is very common. They give more examples. Then we have overcompensation. So you prepare your presentation for hours before you go to the presentation. And so you have these phrases that you say, scripted. You script it all. And it's not really actually you being present in the situation because you're just reciting. Alcohol, drugs and medicines. So you don't actually feel all of the anxiety that you would feel if you didn't take these things. That is unfortunately very common for people with social anxiety, that they'll drink alcohol before they go into a situation. But that is counterproductive in the context of exposure. Or taking beta blockers before a presentation, that kind of thing. Then it talks about how we shouldn't just give up on one exposure and then go to the next always, but we need to wait before the anxiety levels of that exposure gets better slightly before we can start another one. Okay, and then we can't just be so splintered all over the place. And then it talks about post-mortem, basically where we talk afterwards, like, oh, I must have looked like an idiot and that kind of thing. So we have to try to see these exposure as like good things that we've done good to like do this, and not to rewrite and think like, oh, I was so that was so embarrassing. I was such a dumb person for acting that way in that situation, or why did I shake my hands, or what was going on. Think of it in a positive light afterwards, even if you personally don't think that it went that well, because it went better than just avoiding the situation. Okay, so we can't have too high expectations on things. So that is the how the exposure works. They talk here about how to plan, like the summary is to plan it, make time for the exposure. They should be predictable, under your control. You must do it often, probably daily at the beginning. And stay in the situation till your anxiety goes down slightly. Use your cognitive strategies that we've learned to look at the automatic talks before, during, and after the exposure. Don't work against the emotion. Get rid of the security, the coping mechanisms, and the avoidances. Try many different situations. Try something with minimal risk to start with, at least, and plan something that gives a challenge but isn't impossible. Register this in a continual manner. Then it tells us here about doing a new hierarchy of our anxiety, which is something that we've done in episode 1, actually. But now that we know more about our coping strategies and our automatic thoughts, now we can do a new one. So I haven't done this yet, but they give us a little like hierarchy where this is, they give an example of somebody who has to do presentations, and you say out of 1 to 100 your anxiety level and your avoidance level. And so here he puts from least anxiety to most anxiety. Most anxiety is to have a 1-hour presentation in front of 80 people at work. And anxiety, he put 100 and avoidance 100. To say your own opinion in front of 10 colleagues during the weekly meeting, he puts anxiety at 70 and avoidance at 50. So this is something that he needs to start with in order to get to the hour-long presentation with 80 people. Okay, so we should do anxiety hierarchy for certain in certain areas. So this one is presentations, but you could do one about your appearance, for example, like not putting makeup for the day, that kind of thing, and then like not putting blush on for the day, and then like gradually going down. I know that I have a friend who did that, and now she can go out without any makeup at all, so that's good. This kind of anxiety, it can be a little bit more difficult than this, because here it's pretty specific, but it's like the fear of being incompetent. So I'm thinking of making one that is more like asking questions is my lowest, like asking a question to another doctor. And then at the top is like doing a sit-in where a doctor like watches me do something and gives me feedback. That's like where I want to get to without feeling terrible anxiety. So I can start with asking a question to a coworker, and then moving up to asking a question during the meetings, and then telling my opinion during meetings, and then telling my opinion to like the oldest doctor, the senior doctor, and then I can go up to like actually doing doing my work in front of another doctor. So that's kind of what I'm thinking of. I haven't written up yet, but that's my plan. And then it gives you a chart for how to do your exposure. And so you write the date. It gives you a chart like this. You write the date, you write the situation, which is, okay, this person starts to ask other people during their lunch break if they found like a good film in a recent time. And this gives this person 40 on the anxiety, avoids it to 45, and it's 10 minutes. And beforehand, he had anxiety 30. During it, he had 40, and afterwards 20. So it felt better afterwards. And then you write your commentary. And it says, I asked my question, and there was nobody who had actually been at the cinema. But then one person said that she had seen a good film on TV, and it felt good. Then he didn't need to cope any coping strategies. But on Tuesday, he went to the higher level, which was to say an opinion during, like his own opinion during the lunch with his coworkers. And anxiety was 45, not 40. And this was 20 minutes long. And he avoids it to 45% as well. And he had 50 in anxiety before, 60 during it, and 30 afterwards. And he asked about the question of Palestine. He said what he thought, and it actually started a discussion. It went good, but then afterwards he didn't want to say anything more. Okay, because this is a little bit more difficult for him rather than just asking about a film, you know. And then he had plans that for the Wednesday he would speak for 5 minutes about a film that he had seen in front of people during lunch. And that is something that gives him 70 in anxiety and 60 in avoidance. And then on Friday, he wanted to do a 5-minute presentation in front of 5 coworkers, and the anxiety is 70, and he avoids this at 70. So this chart is not completely filled in because it's supposed to be how we do it. But so this will take a lot of energy out of me because I don't know how to do this. And I have so much, and I've been sick this weekend. Both mentally and physically, because my throat is kind of hurting and I was having a fever. But I will be meeting up with some other, I'm going to go to a residence course, which is going to be about disease prevention, so smoking and that kind of thing. And I'll be surrounded by people I don't know, except for one person that I met maybe a few times a few years ago. And so I'll be able to maybe do some kind of exposure where I might ask a question during a lecture, because that's something that gives me a lot of anxiety. So I'm planning on doing that. This weekend, all I've been doing is like I did strike a conversation with the people online at the espresso house. And I also put on a kind of poofy jacket, so it kind of stands out because it's bright pink. I have also done like very subtle things, but because of other reasons, I was too scared to say something during the meeting, the weekly doctor's meeting, because I didn't know what to say. I didn't have a question. I need to prepare a question and say it in front of people at the meeting. And suddenly it was unpredictable. Like the nurses were also invited to our doctor's meeting last time. So I couldn't actually, I felt more scared to ask a question when there were suddenly 10 more people in the room. So I think next doctor's meeting will be like a regular one, and then I'll be able to actually ask a question there. So that's for my life. I was also having a lot of trouble with different things lately. So I felt like I did need a break. And then I ended up becoming sick during this weekend. So yeah, I don't know if I'll manage to do all this before I meet my psychologist again. But I hope for the best. Yeah. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.